The amputee fugitive tossed out the food from the cooler, then carefully placed a cloth-wrapped object inside. Having been on the run for a day and a night, he grabbed a handful of crushed ice and wolfed it down. Just then, a young couple, alerted by the noise, emerged from their tent. Teabag immediately drew a screwdriver with a murderous glare, fixating on them. It seemed Teabag remembered something. He turned and warned the man, "If you dare call the cops, I'll jab this into your eye." After his threat, he snatched the man's hat and took off with the cooler towards the distance. Soon after, Teabag arrived at a veterinary clinic, placing the cooler on the counter and asking the vet to perform a secret surgery on him. Marvin thought Teabag was joking. After all, he was a vet, not qualified to operate on humans. But upon seeing Teabag's severed hand and his blood-soaked body, Marvin quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Marvin hurried to call an ambulance for Teabag, but Teabag had already jumped in front of Marvin, taking him hostage.
Nobody's gonna be doing any calling here, Doctor.
Fine.
That's right.
What do you want?
Marvin had no choice but to do it. Marvin offered to anesthetize Teabag, who refused.
Do I really look that stupid?
Sir, I cannot do a procedure like this without an anesthetic. I have to cut away dead flesh. Nobody can undergo a procedure like this without an anesthetic.
Ain't nobody.
Teabag feared Marvin might call the police while he was unconscious. Teabag endured the pain throughout the surgery without any anesthesia. Worried about infection, Marvin kindly provided him with some antibiotics and painkillers, but Marvin could never have anticipated. Teabag bound him up and injected poison into his body. His only form of gratitude was perhaps to make Marvin's death less painful. After all was done, Teabag assumed Marvin's identity and drove off in Marvin's car, navigating towards Twin K Town in Utah, because a substantial fortune awaited him there. Just a day before, 8 inmates had successfully escaped from Fox River State Penitentiary, and Charles, who didn't escape, revealed a secret with his dying breath. He had hidden $5 million in Twin K Town, Utah, meaning, aside from Teabag, the other 7 escapees also knew this secret. The plot of Prison Break's second season revolves around this $5 million, continuing the glory of Prison Break's first season. Since Teabag, along with Haywire and David, were abandoned by the main group, they avoided police capture due to their lesser objectives. The other 5 were relentlessly pursued by the police. Luckily, they boarded a train, granting them a brief respite. Michael and his brother were thinking of a better future by the lake. They were going to get the $5 million and then flee to Mexico to live out their lives abroad. However, the police had already issued a nationwide manhunt. Without money and clean clothes, escaping even a kilometer became an insurmountable challenge. But Michael had prepared for all this before even entering prison. He glanced at the tattoo on his wrist, hiding the assets and clothes needed for the brothers' first week on the run. Yet, what Michael hadn't anticipated was meeting an opponent this season who could outsmart him. A man named Mahone, a top FBI agent. Mahone, having just taken over the case, noticed Michael's tattoos were extraordinary. He held a press conference claiming he could capture all 8 fugitives within 12 days, then tirelessly sought out Michael's tattoo artist. The tattoo artist revealed that every detail was meticulously designed by Michael himself. Michael was almost obsessive, demanding everything be exactly as he had drawn, spending 200 hours to complete the tattoos. As for the secrets hidden within, she was clueless. Mahone then visited the office Michael had rented before his incarceration. Seeing the walls covered in pinholes, he realized this was a breakout planned over 6 months. A true battle of wits was unfolding, as he immersed himself in understanding Michael's escape plan and his method of erasing traces.
I want divers down in the river.
At this moment, Michael and his group headed straight for the cemetery they had arranged beforehand. The name tattooed on his body is the very cue for the tombstone. They retrieved money and clothes from beneath the tombstone, including fake passports for Michael and his brother's escape abroad, as well as a car key. As they were getting changed and ready to leave, an official car approached. The person who stepped out was Mahone, who had tracked them down based on the tattoos. Michael looked at Mahone incredulously, as he was the first to figure out their movements so quickly. It seemed this man was indeed no ordinary individual. Mahone, eyeing a fleeting shadow deep in the woods, initiated a high-intelligence game of cat and mouse. After escaping, Michael bought a bucket of chicken legs. Having eaten their fill, It was time for everyone to part ways. Michael handed out a few $100s to each person from the money set aside for his and his brother's escape. Though it wasn't much, it should be enough to get home or for whatever else they needed. The group hugged and said their goodbyes. Michael and his brother prepared to head to Utah. But before that, Lincoln wanted to call his lawyer and former girlfriend Veronica to reassure her. However, as soon as Veronica picked up, she urged them to turn themselves in, because Veronica was in Caroline's brother Stedman's house. Revealing him could effortlessly unravel Lincoln's wrongful conviction. Even though Stedman was armed, Veronica bravely made the call to the police. But when the man outside arrived, the men are not police, but Caroline's men.
Mr. Stedman, take a few steps back. Veronica.
Oh my God.
It turned out all calls to the local police station had been monitored from here, and Stedman was merely a prisoner, all orchestrated to protect his sister Caroline's bright future as the current president.
Contraband. You gonna tell us how you got it in there?
I brought it when I got here
Whatever for?
to protect myself.
That's what we're here for. Remember?
To lure Lincoln out, Caroline had her people frame Lincoln's son, L.J., for murder, announcing a court hearing the next day. Though aware it was a trap, under Lincoln's insistence, Michael decided to risk the courthouse to rescue L.J.
Tell me everything you know about the courthouse.
Michael took out a toy water gun from his bag and then took out a can of black spray paint. Just like that, a pistol capable of deceiving the police was created. You would never imagine that the two brothers, Michael and Lincoln, were planning to use this toy gun to violently intercept and rescue Lincoln's framed son, L.J. An hour before this, the brothers had already made a detailed plan to intercept. Lincoln, posing as L.J.'s defense attorney, called the marshal guarding L.J. to request a phone call with L.J. Then, he quietly told L.J. to make sure to take the elevator on the right on the way to the court hearing. However, Lincoln was unaware that their conversation had been monitored by FBI agent Mahone. Fortunately, the father and son spoke in code. Mahone found L.J. and tried to find out what exactly his father had told him, but no matter how much he asked, Mahone didn't get any results. During the elevator ride, Mahone noticed L.J. pretending to tie his shoelaces, deliberately delaying to take the elevator on the right. Realizing something was amiss, Mahone hurriedly entered the elevator, declaring he would personally escort L.J. upstairs. As expected, the brothers opened the elevator's hatch, took out the fake gun, but as they were pulling L.J. up, the gun in Lincoln's hand accidentally fell to the ground. The gun bounced off the ground with an unusually cheerful sound, making it obvious to anyone that it was fake. Mahone immediately sounded the alarm and then firmly grabbed L.J., not letting go. L.J. knew he couldn't escape and told the two to run away quickly. The brothers had no choice but to flee in panic. Knowing the escape routes well, they managed to steal a car and finally escaped. However, during the escape process, Lincoln's leg was unfortunately wounded. Mahone investigated the scene and found that the other party was seriously injured and would not be able to escape. He immediately deployed the police force in various hospitals to wait for the rabbit. But the highly intelligent Michael wouldn't just walk into a trap. He took his brother to a woman's house. This woman was Nika, a dancer who once helped him steal keys. Nika was a foreigner, and Michael had once married her in a sham marriage to help her get a green card. Therefore, Nika was extremely grateful to Michael. But now, Michael and Lincoln were two major fugitives. If she harbored them, she would become an accomplice. But Michael had nowhere else to go, and he promised Nika that they would leave as soon as the wounds were treated. After treating the wounds, Michael turned around to get his car because it had fake passports for him and Lincoln to use to leave the country. The car was also specially modified, so it was very important. But when Michael returned to the parking spot, he found that the car had been towed away due to being parked too long. Michael went to the towing company without stopping, and when he saw the broken glass, he was instantly confused. And the bag inside had already been stolen. The towing company's employee didn't seem like someone who would compensate, so Michael had no choice but to prepare to leave with the car. However, coincidentally, Mahone was making a call to inquire about the fugitive vehicle's information. Upon learning someone came to pick up the car, Mahone instructed the towing company employee to delay the person at all costs, but Michael had already sensed something was wrong and took the keys to escape hastily. Michael met up with Lincoln, and the brothers planned to go to Utah to find the $5 million and then smuggle themselves into Mexico to live out their final years in peace. To escape the police checkpoints set up at every turn, Michael first called his own voicemail, pretending to arrange a meeting point with another accomplice. He was well aware that this call was being monitored. As long as his phone wasn't turned off, Mahone would definitely bring his men and drive over to capture them. Michael decided to use a trick, taking out pig blood and pork from the trunk that he had prepared earlier. The car had been specially modified so that turning on the radio would trigger a timed explosion. By the time the explosion happened, the car would be a bloody mess, leading the police to believe that the two had tragically died in a bridge collapse. However, when the car plunged off the bridge, it didn't explode. Michael guessed that the radio must have jammed. Hearing Mahone's sirens getting closer, Michael suggested playing rock paper scissors to decide who would go and jiggle the radio. True to his role as the older brother, Lincoln didn't hesitate and bravely went to do it. As Michael expected, the police indeed believed that the two had died in a car accident, at least until the test results came out. No one would pay attention to the brothers' whereabouts. During this time, they might have already gotten the money and fled to Mexico. Michael had Nika arrange a car for them, promising to pay her $10,000 once he arrived in Mexico. As agreed. However, they were celebrating too soon. Not far away, two pairs of eyes were closely watching them.
I need a little more. Take us right to him.
Bellick, who once had significant influence at Fox River State Penitentiary, never imagined that he would one day be driven to the point of considering suicide by firearm. Just a day before, the successful escape of 8 inmates had shocked the nation. As the captain of the guards, Bellick, and the warden, Pope, bore the brunt, the investigative department quickly questioned the two of them. Bellick tried to shirk responsibility, but the appearance of a man rendered him speechless. This man was Roy, who had been fired not long ago. Everyone might still remember how Bellick had ridiculed Roy at the time of his dismissal. Now, Roy, appearing as a witness, accused Bellick of long-term bribery and extortion of inmates, giving control of the PI to John, which gradually led to this major escape incident. Faced with his colleague's testimony, Bellick had no response and was fired on the spot. Pope, in a fit of anger, also resigned. Bellick returned home in despair. He had dedicated his entire youth to this job, to the extent that he didn't even have time to find a girlfriend, only to face such a miserable end as he neared retirement. Bellick became more and more desperate and eventually decided to commit suicide by shooting himself in his room. However, just at that moment, his mother's surprised voice came from outside. It turned out that the news reported that each of the escaped convicts had a bounty of $100,000 on them, and Lincoln had an even higher bounty of $300,000. This news reignited Bellick's fighting spirit. Catching them would not only allow him to clear his name but also secure his retirement funds. More importantly, he seemed to know exactly where to start. After making up his mind, Bellick went to the supermarket to purchase the necessary supplies for the journey. It's a small world after all. Here, Bellick encountered Roy, the very person responsible for his dismissal. Seeing his nemesis made his blood boil, and without exchanging many words, they began to fight. But having worked together for decades, there was really no need for them to fight to the death. They quickly came to an agreement to capture the fugitives together and split the bounty. They headed straight for Fox River State Penitentiary and decided to start with Monch. After all, with a bunch of old colleagues there, it didn't take much effort for them to meet Monch.
Kirby, man, like yourself. Let's just say there's some filthy individuals who might enjoy a celly with a woman. And you're gonna tell me everything you know about where those convicts are headed. And I'm gonna throw you.
After some threats, Bellick finally learned about the $5 million in Utah. Then, they investigated Michael's prison visit records and managed to track down the whereabouts of the brothers by following Nika. Using the advantage of their car's powerful engine, they managed to chase them down and force their car to stop by crashing it into a large tree. By the time the brothers came to their senses and thought of escaping, Bellick was already standing in front of them with a gun, and their bounty was no longer their only concern.
Your pal Monche told me all about your little treasure hunt for Westmoreland's stash.
However, they didn't notice Lincoln quietly placing a piece of glass under the tire. Not long after they drove away, the tire was punctured and completely deflated. Bellick had no choice but to send Roy to a small town 3 kilometers away to buy a tire, while he stayed to guard them to prevent their escape. During this ordeal, Mika also learned about the $5 million and was extremely disappointed in Michael. "I've done so much for you, and you only promised to send me $10,000 after everything was done. You didn't mention the $5 million at all. Is this something a person should do?" Bellick watched this unfold with delight in his heart, but Bellick didn't know that this was actually their ruse. Mika pretending to defect was just to gain his trust.
Deal.
Deal.
After a sudden turn of events, Bellick realized that the handgun at his waist was gone. At this point, Roy finally pushed the tires in, but then realized that the tables had turned.
You really suck, Bellick, you know that?
Roll up. Let's go.
It's behind him back.
Ignore him.
You conned her too, made her think you loved her, and look what she got. An overdose and a shot at 30 years inside.
It was also at this time that Michael finally learned from Bellick about Sarah's suicide. Turns out, Sarah had survived her ordeal and was arrested by the police just after being discharged from the hospital. Luckily, Sarah's father was the governor, and Frank had already been nominated as the new vice president. For the sake of his career, Frank asked Sarah to throw the dirty water out, and he would take care of the rest. At this point, Sarah has no choice but to agree to her father's arrangement. After being released on bail, Sarah underwent psychological treatment. However, Sarah didn't know that President Caroline had planted a spy by her side, a man named Kellerman. Kellerman believed that he could trace Michael and Lincoln's whereabouts through Sarah, so he deliberately approached her. Michael felt extremely guilty about Sarah's situation. He used Bellick's phone to call Sarah to apologize and promised to find a way to make it up to her.
You and me. It's real.
However, Michael's confession was witnessed by Nika. Nika's willingness to help was not merely out of simple gratitude towards Michael. After getting rid of Bellick, it was time for them to part ways, but as they embraced each other to say goodbye, Nika took the opportunity to steal Lincoln's gun.
I loved you, Michael. I deserve more than just being the girl that you call when you need something.
You really think you're gonna find the money in Utah?
I don't care about the money in Utah. I don't want any more crime. I turn you in, I get $200,000. Legal.
Since she couldn't have what she wanted, she thought it better to cut her losses and hand them over to the police in exchange for the bounty. But Nika was too naive. Lincoln, having been on the streets for so many years, was wary of everyone and had already removed the magazine. Nika could only watch helplessly as the two brothers walked away. Not long after, the brothers finally arrived in Utah's Double K town. The town was small and not very populous, so it should have been easy to find the money hidden in the cellar of KK Farm. But after asking many people, they all said that there was no KK Farm in town. Even the old man who had grown up there didn't know. Lincoln began to doubt whether Charles had lied, but people generally don't lie on their deathbed. And besides, Charles had asked Michael to leave a share for his daughter. Having no other choice, the two decided to take the risk and go to the administration building to check the public records. After sneaking in and searching through the files, they actually found KK Farm listed on page 1213. However, to their utter surprise, this page had already been torn out. It seemed someone had gotten there first.
Someone else does.
The only people who knew there was $5 million left in KK Farm were the escaped convicts. So, who among the 8 could this person be?
Son of a bitch still alive.
It's rare for a drama where the villain's popularity surpasses that of the male lead, but Teabag and Prison Break managed to do just that.
Sister, they are blue as they're shown. They aren't showing, baby, they're flying. Proudly.
In Prison, he's the one who brings the laughs to the show, not to mention Teabag's lines that are hilariously absurd.
Not that hot! When this guy woke up this morning, he was white!
After the escape team of 8 successfully breaks out of prison, T-Bag loses one hand to John's machete, but T-Bag doesn't give up his longing for freedom. He aims to find the $5 million in dirty money that Charles hid in the cellar and then do something no one could ever guess. On his treasure hunt, he encounters David, who is also after the money. With one hand gone, T-Bag tries to recruit David to act as his digging partner. However, as soon as David leaves to buy tools, T-Bag completely betrays him. Michael and Lincoln, also on the hunt for the money, find T-Bag. Lincoln throws T-Bag into the car and demands to know if he was the one who tore off the treasure map. Of course, T-Bag wouldn't tell them where the map is, but with no way to escape, T-Bag concocts a story that David stole the map of KK Farm, successfully diverting their attention. Until they find David, the brothers couldn't let T-Bag go. They take him to a deserted place and draw a handgun.
In.
T-Bag himself crawls into the trunk of the car. After dealing with T-Bag, the brothers return to Double K Town in search of David. At this time, David is at a hardware store buying tools needed to dig up the cellar. The store owner, thinking David doesn't look like he's from around town but rather like one of America's top 8 fugitives, asks David what his grandfather's name is.
His name's Grandpa. Alright? Look, man, can you just bring this up? I gotta get out of here.
Sensing something off, the store owner throws a stick, knocking David out, and drags him into the storage room to tie him up and hand him over to the police for a bounty. Just then, Michael walks in, sees the scuffle marks on the floor, and immediately understands what happened. He quietly closes the door and, before the store owner can react, punches him. But as Michael heads to the storage room, the store owner, energized by the prospect of a $100,000 bounty, clings to Michael with all his might. Luckily, Lincoln arrives in time to subdue the store owner. After tying up the store owner and rescuing David, they realize T-Bag had deceived them. T-Bag in the boot is desperately trying to remember every building on the map to make sure that the map is well known and then swallowed the paper little by little. When Michael and the others return, the only thing left on T-Bag's chest is a piece of paper from the map he used for boasting.
But don't worry, before I destroyed it, I committed it to my photographic memory.
Now, only T-Bag knows the exact location of the $5 million, leaving Michael and Lincoln no choice but to follow his lead as his diggers. Lincoln directs all his rage towards David.
Oh, whoa, whoa.
You're not worth 1.5. Get in.
Okay.
But they haven't yet realized that FBI agent Mahone has spotted the anomaly in the movements of the 8 fugitives. They're all converging on Utah, surely hiding a secret unknown to the police. Mahone immediately recalls the money Charles hid 30 years ago. Convinced they're after that money, he narrows down his search to prepare for the arrest. Meanwhile, the treasure hunting team, guided by T-Bag's memory, has arrived near KK Farm, dreaming of what they'll do with the $5 million. They cross a dirt mound only to be dumbfounded at the sight of KK Farm. 30 years have passed, and KK Farm no longer exists, replaced by a vast expanse of modern buildings, meaning the map in T-Bag's mind has become utterly useless. Looking for the cellar in such a vast area of buildings is like finding a needle in a haystack. Michael is at his wit's end in despair, yet T-Bag still finds it appropriate to crack jokes.
What, you got a divining rod tattooed on your ass?
I don't want to hear anything out of your mouth other than what your photographic memory spits out regarding that map!
You watch your tone with me, boy.
I will watch you get tossed to the side of the road to fend for yourself, boy. Because if you can't remember where that silo was...
Seeing Michael so angry for the first time, even T-Bag gets scared. He tries hard to recall the original location of the farm from his pieced-together memory. The farm was next to a fork in the road, surrounded by many trees, and had a towering barn within. After circling the residential area a few times, they finally stop at a fork that seems somewhat similar. Michael, after some analysis, notices that the trees in the area are all about the same height, likely planted at the same time, but 2 trees are noticeably shorter, probably due to not getting enough sunlight, which must mean that a tall building blocked the sun here, and this must have been where the farm's barns stood. Since these houses are smaller and simpler, they wouldn't need deep foundations, which means the money hidden in the cellar might still be there. Just as they're about to check it out, a still charming blonde woman comes out of the house. Digging in someone else's cellar is definitely not feasible. T-Bag suggests just doing away with her, but Michael and his brother, having their own moral compass, decide to find a legitimate reason to get inside. While Lincoln is tampering with their house's electric meter, T-Bag, the old pervert, is ogling the woman inside with eyes wide as copper bells.
I was just looking, pretty. What's that old chestnut? I can look at the menu, doesn't mean I'm gonna eat.
We get in, we get the money, we get out. That's it.
No, absolutely.
After cutting off the woman's electricity, they let David out of the trunk. They tell him to go back to the tool shop to get some work clothes and shovels, fill up the car with gas, and then hurry back. But who would have thought? While David was grabbing the tools, the store owner's friend stops by, notices the scuffle marks, and immediately calls the police. In a panic, David swings a shovel at him, then locks him and the store owner together. Distracted, David forgets to refill the car with gas and hurries back. Lincoln noticed his averted eyes and on inquiry found that he was in trouble.
Man, I don't know, dude. It set off so fast.
Did the call go through?
Maybe, man.
What do you mean maybe? Did the call go through?
Yes, I don't know. I don't know, man.
Their top priority becomes to dig up the money quickly. Michael, posing as an electric company worker, knocks on Jeanette's door, and after some sweet talking, she finally allows them in. Michael says, "There's a problem with the cables under your garage floor. We need to dig up the floor to inspect it. But don't worry, we'll fix everything back to normal afterward, and the entire repair process will be at no cost to you."
Fine. That's okay, y'all go ahead and do whatever y'all need to do.
Jeanette, the noise might be substantial.
However, just as they are about to start work, two familiar faces suddenly show up. It turns out they are Benjamin and Sucre, two of the Grade 8 escapees. Sucre's entire reason for escaping was to see his beloved girlfriend Mary Cruz, but upon breaking out, he learns that Mary Cruz has been swept off her feet by his cousin Hector. Just as Sucre arrives at the wedding ready to elope with Mary Cruz, Hector calls the police, reporting a fugitive at the scene.
That don't sound good, cuz.
Desperate and heartbroken, Sucre flees the scene and on the road, he meets Benjamin, who is also out treasure hunting. Now, with 6 of the original 8-man escape team gathered in Utah, what has become of the other 2? In fact, John had the best situation after escaping prison. He not only regained his former status but also reunited with his wife and children and had a secure plan to go abroad. However, just then, he receives a tip-off about the witness who testified against him appearing in a small motel. John, who was always eager to revenge, couldn't bear it and decided to kill him before leaving the country, despite his wife's persuasion. But little did he know, this was a trap set by Mahone to lure John in.
You're looking for the rat, John. Fibonacci's 2,000 miles from here.
But John was so fed up with prison life that he couldn't go back to prison, so he raised his gun and chose to kill himself. Meanwhile, Haywire, after being ditched by the team, leisurely pedals his way to freedom on a bicycle, with the police focusing most of their efforts on Michael and the others. Haywire remains at large to this day. Back on Michael's side, Jeanette is extremely hospitable, constantly coming in to check on their progress or to offer them something to drink, making it impossible for them to work properly. So, Teabag volunteers to keep Jeanette company and distract her attention.
I know how to play nice.
I'll be watching.
But upon seeing Jeanette's still charming figure, Teabag's gaze doesn't want to leave for even a moment. Teabag tries hard to conceal his inner desires, while Jeanette is completely unaware that she's sitting next to an unforgivable rapist.
Join me?
Just 2 fingers.
One has to admire Teabag's flirting skills. They talk everything from poetry and songs to life philosophy, just when Teabag thinks he's about to succeed. Jeanette's words chill him to the bone.
A strong guy that doesn't speak much. Would you go in there and ask him if he would like to have a drink with me after he punches him?
It turns out Jeanette is interested in the strong Lincoln. Teabag's self-esteem took a massive hit. He looked at the ice pick on the table, his tongue moving up and down in his mouth. Meanwhile, Michael and the others have successfully uncovered a corner of the cellar, and just need to expand the area to access the money hidden inside. Just as everyone sees hope, David tells them that there was an accident when he went to get the tools, so in his rush, he forgot to refuel the car. Michael is furious upon hearing this.
I want you to go back into town. I want you to gas up that car.
Because I'm not driving around with millions of dollars in the trunk. Do you understand?
Man, why do I got to do it? Okay.
But David is still too young, his dodgy and evasive eyes making it obvious to anyone that something is wrong. The staff immediately calls the police and deliberately delays, waiting for the police to arrive. David noticed an unhooked phone nearby and, upon seeing the portraits of 8 wanted criminals overhead, immediately realized the situation and fled in panic. But it's too late. The police relentlessly pursue him to a farm, where Mahone suddenly fires a shot, scaring David into surrendering with his hands up.
Drop!
Here a group of people dug for half a day and finally noticed something wrong. Why there is no movement upstairs? Could it be that T-Bag has harmed someone? Michael rushes upstairs and barges into the room, thankfully finding no harm done.
She's got the hots for the big, strong one.
However, the next second, Jeanette darkly tells them to pack up and leave immediately, not allowing them to finish the work. It's clear that T-Bag has angered Jeanette. Despite Michael's pleas, Jeanette is adamant about them leaving, but just then, a police officer arrives at the door. In a panic, T-Bag quickly grabs a hammer and subdues Jeanette.
Hey Mom, you home?
It turns out the person is Jeanette's daughter, Anne. When Anne sees the ice scattered on the ground, she immediately senses something wrong and cautiously moves upstairs with her gun drawn. Just then, Jeanette screams, and raises her gun, aiming it at Michael and another person.
In the cards here.
Back away and put your hands up.
I put my hand up. Gonna take a jugular with it.
It's okay.
Back away and put your hands up.
Just go easy.
Go nothing. She ain't the one carrying the card.
Don't move.
Let's be civil.
The crisis was finally averted, and the group tied up Jeanette and her daughter, worried that T-Bag might kill to keep them quiet. Michael asks Sucre to watch over them while the rest go back to digging for the money. Because T-Bag had lost a hand and couldn't help dig the cellar, he sat on the side, flipping through a magazine while teasing Benjamin.
Mr. $100 bill. What's it like being with the African persuasion anyhow?
You know, shut the hell up. Don't hit me a nerve.
Benjamin has never seen such a despicable request in his life and is ready to hit him. But just then, Lincoln sees on TV that his son has been released from prison without charges. Unaware that this is actually a trap set by the government to lure out Lincoln, as expected, the simple-minded Lincoln ignores Michael's advice, drops the shovel, and drives off in Jeanette's sports car to pick up his son. He plans to take LJ and flee the country together. In the interrogation room, Mahone was trying to extract information about Michael and the others' whereabouts from David. However, David remained tight-lipped until Mahone produced a photo of T-Bag killing Marvin, gradually breaking down his psychological defenses. David, not inherently a villain but imprisoned over a stolen baseball card, likely chose to reveal the digging location to prevent T-Bag from committing more murders. David had one condition: there were hostages inside, and a hasty police raid could provoke a murderer like T-Bag into drastic actions. He suggested he should go first, a strategy Mahone agreed with, assembling all available officers to proceed with David to apprehend the suspects. However, upon opening the door, out came a short-haired beauty, who was David's girlfriend. It turned out that David had snitched too much in prison, which had led to the escape team looking down on him. Now, he would rather die than snitch again. David wanted to seize this opportunity to confess his love to his girlfriend, hoping she would wait for him to be honorably released from prison. But before he could finish, the police took him away, leaving Mahone feeling deeply insulted by the intelligence insult. He took David to a deserted roadside and ended David's life with several shots. Mahone then placed another gun, one without fingerprints, in David's hand to fabricate the illusion that David had attempted to grab the gun, thus making it seem like self-defense. At this moment, Mahone's tale finally came out. Meanwhile, Sucre, having heard over Anne's walkie-talkie that David was captured, rushed downstairs to inform the group to leave immediately. As the group was at a loss, Benjamin seemed to discover something.
Maybe you should. Maybe we all should.
Excitedly, they hurried to prepare to leave. However, at that moment, Sucre, always thought to be honest and simple, pointed his gun at the other three, intending to take all the money for himself. With heavy hearts and no other choice, they handed over the travel bag filled with money to Sucre. Watching Sucre walk away with the money, the remaining three were devastated, especially Teabag, who was hiding in a corner, but staying there was pointless. Michael quickly went upstairs to give Jeanette a knife so she could free herself once they were gone. He also grabbed a rope intending to tie up Teabag for the police, only to find upon returning to the warehouse that Teabag had vanished.
I don't know, man. Look, I gotta go. All right. Good luck.
Michael then went back upstairs to take his walkie-talkie and rushed towards the woods. However, at that moment, a familiar figure appeared before him.
Adios, amigos, huh? You were great.
Me, you, and Link.
4. We gotta send a share to Charles's daughter with her father's love, just like I promised.
It turned out the act of keeping the money to themselves was a plan they had devised together, but when Sucre opened the money bag, they were both stunned. Inside was nothing but magazines. The real money had already been taken by Teabag. It turns out that when he was reading the magazines, he had planned to take the money for himself. The travel bag given to Sucre was the one filled with magazines. Taking advantage of the other's absence, Teabag had quietly taken the money and left, then bought a second-hand car to drive towards a bright future. Absolutely don't get into online dating, because you might end up meeting a vicious rapist. Susan welcomed Teabag into her home, and her daughter instantly adored her mom's new boyfriend. As they joyfully played digital games together, Susan, gazing upon this tender scene, began to envision the bliss of a family of 4 together, and it was from this moment that Teabag genuinely experienced the joy of having a family. He wished to leave his dark past behind and fully immerse himself in Susan's family, to truly reform and become a good person, until Susan saw on TV that this man was actually wanted for the rape and murder of 6 students. She was instantly shocked. After calming down, Susan quietly called the police. As a result, Teabag was arrested, sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In prison, Teabag wrote countless letters seeking forgiveness, even though it was Susan who had reported him, because it was the only person he'd ever loved or even wanted to change. But he'd never gotten a response from Susan. Now, Teabag had successfully escaped from prison and had swallowed the entire $5 million the escape team had unearthed. He changed into decent clothes, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, and returned to Susan's old home, hoping to start over, but upon opening the door, Teabag found the place completely abandoned, with memories of the past flooding back in the empty room. However, as Teabag turned around, a brick was fiercely thrown at him. The assailant was none other than the former prison guard captain, Bellick. After being abandoned by the Michael brothers last time and left penniless, Bellick had planned to ask his mother for money to take the bus home, but then they saw on TV that Jeanette had been kidnapped and the garage was in disarray, indicating Michael and the others had found the loot. After discussing, they decided not to go back. So, they disguised themselves as officers and immediately went to Jeanette's to inquire about the whereabouts of Michael and others. The $100 was Teabag's deliberate show-off, making a special trip back just to stuff it into Jeanette's chest. Only then did they learn that Teabag had absconded with the money. As the former prison guard captain, Bellick easily found out how Teabag was imprisoned and how he had written to Susan seeking forgiveness. Therefore, Bellick tracked him down using the mailing address. They tied up Teabag and demanded to know where the $5 million was.
Where you stashed Westmoreland's money, or I'm gonna pluck you like a chicken, stitch by stitch.
But Teabag, who had gone through so much to secure the money, wouldn't just hand it over. Thus, Teabag was tortured by Bellick and Roy all night but still refused to talk. As Teabag took the chance to escape, a key from his trouser leg suddenly fell to the ground. He leaned over and picked up the key, immediately shoving it into his mouth. It turns out that just before Teabag came to Susan, he quietly deposited the money in one of the motel's public lockers. The key he swallowed was meant to open that locker. Left with no alternatives, Bellick and Roy had no choice but to wait for Teabag to excrete the key. On the other hand, after discovering they had been swindled out of $5 million by Teabag, Michael and Sucre harbored thoughts of killing Teabag. But there is nothing they can do now, because the message from the intercom is that the police are searching for them. Fortunately, Teabag still had a shred of conscience. As he took the $5 million, he left a few $100s for the others. Michael and Sucre purchased a used car, planning to head to the rendezvous point with Lincoln before attempting to flee to Mexico. Before that, Sucre made a call to his brother to inquire about his girlfriend, Mary Cruz. Unexpectedly, Mary Cruz hadn't married Hector. She had a change of heart right at the wedding venue. It seemed Mary Cruz still deeply loved him. Overjoyed, Sucre no longer desired to flee to Mexico but decided to take the risk to find Mary Cruz. With Michael's blessing, they parted ways. Michael, heading to the meeting point alone, was encircled and pursued by the police. Continuing like this, he would eventually get caught. With 2 days left until his meeting with Lincoln, Michael decided to take the initiative to investigate Mahone during this gap. Believing in the strategy of knowing both the enemy and oneself, Michael gathered a vast amount of information on Mahone, then bought a decent outfit and posed as an FBI agent conducting a background check for Mahone's promotion, visiting Mahone's ex-wife Pam's house. Curiously, although Mahone clearly loved his ex-wife and child, it was unknown why he chose to divorce. Digging deeper, it was revealed that this was all because, years ago, Mahone encountered an extremely intelligent criminal. Obsessed with capturing him, Mahone focused all his efforts on the task. Until a year ago, when there was no more news of the criminal, Mahone suddenly relaxed, and Mahone had purchased a bunch of random lie, tinkering in his garden daily, not allowing anyone close. After analyzing, Michael speculated that the criminal had likely been captured by an almost paranoid Mahone and then his body was whipped and buried in his backyard. The lie was intended for destroying the evidence. Before leaving, Michael stole Pam's phone and dialed Mahone's number. Michael hoped Mahone would stop pursuing him, otherwise, he would expose the body in the garden, but Mahone flatly rejected him, as he was facing both internal and external troubles. The coincidence of 2 escaped prisoners dying under his pursuit, coupled with Mahone's past of violent law enforcement, led the Internal Affairs Department to investigate him quickly.
Sir, there's a phone call for you.
I'll take it later.
Sir, you're gonna want to take this now.
Luckily, Mahone had a powerful backer, Kellerman, which was why he remained unscathed, and Kellerman was backed by President Caroline. Since the escape team had been with Lincoln for too long, they inevitably knew some inside information about Lincoln being framed, so they all had to die. Mahone obeyed Kellerman because Kellerman also knew about the body buried in Mahone's backyard. Meanwhile, Lincoln, while taking LJ to the rendezvous point, was indeed captured by the government's men, but on the way back, a van rammed the police car and several people came out, directly taking the father and son away.
Come here! Let go of me!
Okay, calm down. Calm down. You try that again.
Who the hell are you?
We're on your side. We're with your father.
They were brought to a secret location, where LJ finally met his grandfather he had never seen before. Aldo's subsequent words made Lincoln realize that he was just a minor piece in this grand scheme. Bellick placed a colander on the toilet and then stripped Teabag's pants down, forcefully pressing him onto the toilet bowl. To prevent Teabag from escaping, he tightly bound him with tape. Bellick did this because Teabag had just swallowed the key to a locker containing $5 million in stolen money. To expedite the process, Bellick even had Roy purchase laxatives. After completing these preparations, the two vigilantly stood guard outside, eagerly fantasizing about living the high life with the $5 million. Their persistence paid off. As a torrential release heralded the key's arrival, Teabag finally expelled it.
Get the stool.
What stool?
The stool.
Roy inwardly sighs that every time something good happens, Bellick are the first to get on it, while he's relegated to the front line to do the dirty work. However, for the sake of $5 million, Roy temporarily swallowed his pride. The duo then tied Teabag, a wanted criminal, to the radiator and called the police. Despite Teabag's pleas, it was to no avail. He was now of no use to them. Minutes later, the sound of police sirens approached, sending Teabag into a frenzy of desperation. If caught, he knew he would never again leave prison alive. Teabag glanced at his recently stitched severed hand and, in a grim resolve, bit through the sutures. By the time the police arrived, the place was deserted, leaving behind only a severed hand in the corner. Meanwhile, Bellick and his accomplice had reached the motel and successfully retrieved the $5 million. He's always the first to go when something good happens. Overwhelmed with excitement, Bellick rushed to check the money in the bag, unaware that Roy had quietly pulled a hammer out of his pocket.
All that green. It's prettier than Grand Canyon. Hey, that's the most beautiful thing you ever seen.
Hand over the bag, Brennan. I'm not kidding around.
Well, you think you're pandy ass?
Unbeknownst to him, the hunter became the hunted. Roy emerged as the ultimate victor in life. He moved into the most luxurious presidential suite and ordered 3 ladies of varied allure. From the plump to the slim, the tall to the short, blondes to brunettes, he had it all. But as Roy turned to grab the money, he realized there was a GPS tracker in the bag. Before Roy could react, the ferocious teabag broke in. A terrified Roy hastily begged for mercy, claiming that the idea to torture Teabag was all Bellick's and offering to split half of the money with Teabag. But it was too late. The ruthless Teabag ended Roy's life with a wine bottle. By then, Bellick had awakened from his unconscious state. A female officer came to inquire, but Bellick was at a loss for words. He couldn't possibly admit to trailing to Utah for the $5 million only to have his colleague abscond with it, so he concocted an excuse. After the police left, an enraged Bellick called Roy.
Thieving son of a better get down on your knees and pray to God that I don't find you. Because if I do, mark my words, I'm gonna gut you about a stern.
However, upon leaving the hospital, he encountered Roy's body being brought in.
Mr. Bellick?
Yeah.
Do you mind answering a few more questions?
At the police station, Bellick realized he couldn't hide the truth any longer and divulged some self-serving information. Unbeknownst to him, the police had already accessed recordings of his threats to Roy. Moreover, Roy's stay in the presidential suite was charged to his credit card. Bellick and Roy's collaboration had always been financed through his credit card. After killing Roy, Teabag deliberately left the spending records at the scene. Now, Bellick had no defense. With a clear motive, the police promptly arrested him.
I did not kill Roy Gary! You understand what I'm telling you? Bagwell set me up! Get your hands off of me!
Bradley Bellick, you are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Roy William Gary. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer and to have him present with you when being questioned. If you cannot hire a lawyer, the court will appoint one for you.
From then on, Bellick completely fell from being a guard to becoming a prisoner. Sarah had just returned home to find her father, the governor, hang from the door frame. In her haste to take him down, she didn't notice a key falling to the ground. She checked her father's pulse, only to find he had been dead for some time. Soon after, the police arrived and preliminarily ruled Frank's death a suicide, as the guards were outside and there were no signs of forced entry. But Sarah refused to believe that her father, who had just been nominated for vice president, would choose to end his life without any warning. After the investigators left, she discovered a key under her backpack, one she had never seen before. However, Sarah was too distraught to concern herself with the origin of the key and pocketed it before dragging her exhausted body back to her place. But upon opening her door, she was shocked to find syringes and morphine scattered on the table, a clear sign someone had broken in intending to stage her overdose suicide. Before she could process this, an agent appeared behind Sarah.
Miss Tancredi, I didn't mean to startle you.
What the hell are you doing in my house?
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Realizing he intended to kill her, she quickly made sure to fight back, leaving marks on her body so the police would not believe it was a suicide. But her assailant had already planned for this.
Parent attempt to avoid jail time. The governor's daughter skips bail and disappears. I'm talking about your last minutes, Miss Tancredi.
Please don't do this.
That stuff on the table is premium.
Confused and panicked, Sarah stumbled upon a can of insecticide. Seizing the moment, she managed to escape and found a public phone booth to call her father's colleague for help. However, as Sarah hid in the corner awaiting rescue, a beautiful woman with a similar build and hair color happened to come to the public phone booth to make a call. Unexpectedly, this woman was mistaken for her and shot dead in the street. Realizing she could trust no one, Sarah hurriedly removed her phone's battery. Desperate, Sarah finally thought of Michael. Since his escape, Michael had sent her several encrypted letters. Deciphering them, Sarah learned that Michael wanted her to meet him in a remote town soon. After many days, they finally met outside the prison for the first time. However, Michael's next words chilled Sarah to the bone.
I've arranged for us to get to Panama. We're meeting up with my brother tomorrow.
Wait, that's your plan?
Although she still loves Michael deeply, she can't accept being on the run with two of America's most wanted criminals, especially since her current predicament is a direct result of Michael. After venting her frustrations, a car seemed to approach from afar. The man was FBI agent Mahone. During Sarah's escape, Kellerman, who had intentionally gotten close to Sarah, discovered the encrypted communication and then handed it over to the highly intelligent Mahone for decryption. Mahone had successfully tracked them to this location. They fled to a nearby factory, with Mahone following. Gun in hand, Michael knew he was there to silence them, doubting they could escape alive this time. In a critical moment, Michael spotted a gas pipeline valve and hatched a plan.
I wouldn't do that if I were you, Alex. You smell that? It's propane. It's filling the room. And if you pull that trigger, we both die.
After a verbal duel, Mahone found himself at a loss against Michael and could only watch helplessly as Michael made his escape once again. After escaping danger, Michael and Sarah arrived at a safe motel to tend to their wounds. Seizing the moment when Michael went to freshen up, Sarah chose to silently leave. Because Michael himself was in danger, Sarah did not want to follow Michael to live on the run. However, reconsidering that she, although not a fugitive, was also being hunted and she couldn't bear to part with Michael, Sarah chose to return. But just then, Kellerman, who had been tracking her, appeared before her. On the other side, Aldo finally revealed the true reason behind his son being framed. Aldo, like Kellerman, was once part of a mysterious company, led by a man named Bill. Caroline's presidency was secured by the company's removal of all obstacles, controlling the U.S. government and manipulating policies while conducting operations the government could not officially sanction. As the company's actions grew more outrageous, Aldo, not wanting to be complicit, took some critical documents and fled. To force Aldo to surface, the company framed his son, Lincoln, for the murder of Stedman and sent him to prison. They never anticipated Michael would successfully break Lincoln out. If the framing of Lincoln were proven, President Caroline would be forced to resign. To prevent the spread of this information, the company sought to kill Lincoln and anyone with first-hand contact, including all 8 escapees from the prison. Aldo only now shared this because his team had just secured vital information. A National Security Agency analyst, delving into a high-level surveillance program, accidentally overheard a phone call between President Caroline and her supposedly dead brother, Stedman. The analyst was horrified. Lincoln's execution for the murder of Stedman, who is still alive. Is that not a conspiracy? Therefore, the analyst took the tape and mailed it to Frank. This became the direct cause of Frank's death and Sarah being hunted. Aldo was certain the tape was with Sarah, for the company would not relentlessly pursue her otherwise. With this recording, Lincoln's innocence would be undeniable, and they could seize the opportunity to move against the president and the company. While discussing, they were oblivious to the presence of a mole in their midst. The mole hurriedly made a call to the leader, Bill. Moments later, the company's assassin arrived, skilled and unobstructed, but the sound of a bullet casing hitting the ground before entering alerted Lincoln. He immediately had everyone hide and then tackled the assassin, disarming him. The struggle became intense. The assassin, being a professional, grabbed a kitchen knife and lunged at Lincoln. Fortunately, one of Aldo's men ended the assassin with a shot. At that moment, the assassin's phone rang, and the caller was Bill.
Just like anyone else you sent to take out my son.
We want you. This isn't about LJ. There's a very simple way for all of this to end.
I'll tell you how it's gonna end. Me staring your dead eye with my hand around your throat.
You don't even know who I am.
Such a beautiful woman, yet she suffered such brutal abuse. A man pulled out a high-powered iron, plugged it in, and then forcefully pushed Sarah into the bathtub. Paul resorted to such drastic measures because Sarah's father had hidden a recording. This incriminating recording, once exposed, would inevitably lead to President Caroline's downfall, but Sarah truly had no idea what they were after, and her father hadn't given her anything before he died. While in the water, Sarah suddenly remembers picking up an unfamiliar key next to her father's body, perhaps the very place where he hid the recording, but Sarah would never reveal this because, even if she did, she would be silenced by murder. Seeing no results from his interrogation, Paul decided to drown Sarah in the bathtub. Just as Paul was about to saw her body into pieces, a knock from the hotel owner sounded outside due to complaints from neighbors about the noise. While they talked, Sarah managed to bite open the bathtub's valve. By the time Paul returned to the room, the bathtub was empty, a mere shadow of its former self. Seizing the moment, Sarah quickly grabbed the key from the table and escaped through the window. Meanwhile, Bill called to inquire about the outcome. Paul, not knowing how to explain, lied that Sarah was already dead, but Bill wasn't fooled and demanded a photo of the disposed body. Seeing his lie exposed, Paul knew the company wouldn't let him off easily, so he hurriedly made a call to Caroline, pleading for mercy. But Caroline, now president, would certainly not associate with someone like him. When Paul tried to contact his former colleagues, he discovered he had been erased from the system, as if he had never existed in this world at all. Clearly, it wouldn't be long before he would disappear from this world entirely. On the other side, another power was also searching for the whereabouts of the recording. Aldo wanted to bring down Caroline and the company and clear his son Lincoln's name, so he had to find Sarah and get the recording first. Knowing the special relationship between Michael and Sarah, Aldo persuaded Lincoln to find Michael. After leaving LJ with a secretary, they rushed to meet Michael, as agreed by the two brothers. Unexpectedly, Sucre also showed up. After Maricruz ran away from her wedding to avoid Hector's harassment, she went to Mexico alone to clear her mind. Meanwhile, Michael was also heading to Mexico, so Sucre followed him all the way here to meet up with Michael. Michael had the meet here because he had made a detailed escape plan before going to jail. He had the coordinates tattooed on his body. 200 kilometers from here was a smuggler who, for a price, could get them on a plane to Mexico. Along the way, Aldo tried hard to persuade Michael not to flee the country, claiming that getting the recording would set them free. But Michael had seen Sarah just yesterday and heard nothing about a recording. Moreover, Michael knew too well the government's darkness. Having the recording might not necessarily bring down the president. While the two sides were at a standstill, a familiar figure appeared on a distant hill. After being released, Mahone continued to analyze the tattoos and, breaking his head over it, finally realized that the numbers looked more like coordinates. So, he hurriedly drove to the location.
Go!
They narrowly escape, but unexpectedly, Aldo was shot in the stomach during his escape and is seriously injured. The two could only give their father a simple burial, though Aldo hadn't raised them for over 30 years. He had done what he did to avoid involving his family. From that moment on, Michael resolved to stay and avenge his father. The three drove to the smuggling point. After hugging Sucre goodbye, they watched him board the plane.
Panama would have been good.
Are you ready for this? I'm waiting years. Good to hear it. Because today's the day we stop running.
But on the brothers' way back, a fighter jet flew over them, which must have been there to intercept the stowaway plane. Just as Michael was worrying about Sucre, Mahone's car caught up again, and the fighter jet intercepting them was there because he had alerted the authorities. They hurriedly fled in their car, but hadn't anticipated that their fuel wouldn't last as long as Mahone's. From day to night, Mahone finally succeeded in capturing the two brothers, but just as Mahone was about to shoot the two brothers, the Border Patrol arrived in time.
United States Border Patrol, drop your weapon!
Reluctantly, Mahone had no choice but to lower his gun, albeit begrudgingly. In the women's restroom, Sarah lit a match to sterilize the sewing needle in her hand. She took a deep breath, preparing to stitch a long tear on her arm, but despite several attempts, she couldn't muster the courage to start. Sarah slapped the restroom door hard, and finally, with gritted teeth and without anesthesia, she stitched through her flesh, needle by needle. To avoid detection, Sarah endured the immense pain without making a sound. She dared not go to the hospital because she was harboring a shocking secret, which, if revealed, would inevitably bring down the current President Caroline and was the direct cause of her being hunted. In this world, the only person Sarah could trust was her beloved Michael, but despite repeatedly dialing Michael's number, no one answered. It wasn't until she saw the news of the Michael brothers' arrest on TV that Sarah was completely stunned. This meant that she no longer had anyone in the world she could trust. Sarah returned to the hotel and started simulating cutting off her long hair with a blade. To avoid recognition, she had to painfully cut off her beloved long hair. Then she discarded her phone, bank cards, and ID, and began a life on the run. On the other side, The news of Michael and Lincoln's capture made the headlines, and the investigative team was overjoyed, but Mahone couldn't feel happy because if Michael and Lincoln were brought back to Washington, the company's dirty deeds would inevitably be exposed. Bill also called, ordering Mahone to kill them en route at any cost. That afternoon, the Michael brothers' transport process was initiated, with a group of fully armed police looking impenetrable. Meanwhile, Bill had made arrangements on his end. They would create an opportunity for Mahone, who just needed to shoot at the escaping brothers in the chaos. Then, a call was made to Paul, ostensibly asking him to assist Mahone in the killing. Secretly, Bill instructed Mahone to ensure that, amid the chaos, a stray bullet would take out Paul as well. The vehicle transporting them quickly arrived at a tunnel, where, as expected, a large truck broke down and blocked the way. All the police rushed forward to help. This series of actions thoroughly confused Michael. They couldn't possibly be thinking of lifting the truck away, could they? What puzzled him even more was that the guards watching over them were also called over to help. As the police left, the keys to the handcuffs just happened to fall on the seat, and the door to the opposite culvert was also open.
Come on. Alright, let's say we get the cuffs off. Where do we go?
It seemed too coincidental, so much so that even a fool could see this was a blatant attempt to let them escape. However, the brothers were caught in a dilemma. If they didn't run, Lincoln would return to prison to face the death penalty, and Michael would spend the rest of his life in prison. Running would mean giving Mahone permission to shoot to kill, but still, there was that sliver of hope. After weighing their options, the brothers decided to take a desperate chance.
Here we go. Here we go. Copy that. All right, we're on. Heads up. Full traffic.
Lincoln was the first to climb over the railing, with Michael following closely behind. In a moment of life and death, the two successfully escaped into the culvert, but they didn't know it was a dead end. With Mahone relentlessly pursuing them and Paul blocking the exit, the brothers realized they were trapped. However, at the critical moment when Mahone was about to shoot, Paul acted first, and it was a bewildered Mahone who fell.
President Reynolds ruined your life. She ruined my life. You want to take the bitch down? You just found your inside man, but it's got to be right now.
Let's go! Now!
It turned out Paul was well aware of his situation. Now, having been expelled from the system, his next step would be to vanish without a trace. It was better to join forces with Michael and his brother, hoping for a slim chance of survival. With Paul's status as an intelligence agency operative, the three of them easily made their way to a secluded cabin in Montana. There, they found the President Caroline's supposedly dead brother, Terrence, being held. If Terrence were to appear in public, Caroline and the company would never have a chance to recover.
He looked pretty good for a dead man.
Get in the car!
Wait. Who's there?
It's Kellerman.
Where are you
He's got
taking me? Get in
Stedman.
the car!
Do not let him escape. Kill Stedman. Kill them all now.
To escape police capture, Teabag bit off his hand that had just been stitched up a few days ago. Having escaped, Teabag arrived at a bar and started celebrating while looking at his wanted photo on TV. But just as Teabag turned around, he saw something of interest, a very realistic-looking prosthetic hand. Teabag immediately approached to ask a veteran where he got his arm attached, indicating he was willing to pay any price. However, the destitute and cynical soldier, having lost an arm himself, wondered why Teabag was so wealthy. Thus, the veteran flatly refused Teabag, but the veteran didn't know how ruthless the man before him could be. After leaving the bar, the hand had already become Teabag's. Teabag squatted in front of the post office, and then he was going to do something that will completely change your mind. But in the end, you would be deeply moved by his twisted actions. After waiting for a female employee to leave work, Teabag approached her. During their meal, Teabag even tenderly wiped a grain of rice from her mouth. One had to admire Teabag's flirting skills. In just a few minutes, he had Denise beaming with joy. Upon learning that Denise had just gotten divorced, Teabag boldly confessed, and by the end of the meal, Denise was easily won over. Teabag asked Denise to help look up a relative's address. Blinded by love, Denise didn't have the slightest doubt and helped Teabag look up a cousin named Susan. But the moment Denise handed the printed information to Teabag, her face instantly froze.
Oh dear God.
I really wish you hadn't seen that.
By the time Teabag left the post office, Denise was already a dead body lying on the ground. Not long after, Teabag arrived at Susan's doorstep. nervously fixing his hair. Then, Teabag took a deep breath and knocked on Susan's door.
Hello, Mrs. Hollander. They say a good woman is hard to find. Well, if that's true, you must be very, very good.
Fear was written all over Susan's face. She had once deeply loved this man and even thought about marrying him, until she discovered that this man was a fugitive wanted for the rape and murder of 6 students. She took the opportunity to report Teabag and send him to prison. Then, she moved to this place where no acquaintances knew where to live. But Teabag was also deeply in love with her, the only one who made him want to put aside his past and start anew. Teabag said he had forgiven her, and he only wanted to reintegrate into her family, to be a good father and a good husband. During their conversation, Susan's 2 children came home from school. They were unusually happy about their mother's long-unseen boyfriend's visit. Clearly, Susan had not mentioned anything about Teabag to them. When Gracie asked Teabag how he lost his arm, Teabag had no choice but to lie that it was an accident at work, but he received $1 million in compensation for each finger. Taking advantage of this moment, Susan tried to retrieve the handgun from the drawer, but Teabag quickly got up and grabbed her. Teabag stated that the $5 million would be spent on the 3 of them. Fearing for her children's safety, Susan had to pretend to be happy. In the afternoon, Teabag pulled Susan to watch TV with the children, and he was genuinely happy at that moment. However, Susan was uncomfortable. She intentionally spilled tea to try and retrieve the handgun from the drawer, but she didn't know the gun had already been taken by Teabag.
We did put the past where it belonged.
Do not lie to me, woman. After turncoating me to the authorities, after ruining everything we had, after breaking my heart into so many pieces that I will never be able to find them all, you can at least do me the favors to not stand there and lie to my face.
Mom? Zach sensed his mother's panic. He hurriedly copied the ball bag and slammed it at Teabag. But how could the strength of Susan and her 2 children possibly match Teabag's? In a moment, they were trapped in the house again. After this incident, Teabag nailed all the doors and windows shut with wooden boards. However, neighbors kept coming over to look for Susan. Knowing this couldn't go on without being discovered, Teabag decided to take them back to his old home, which he remembered. The place had been uninhabited for many years and had fallen into disrepair. Teabag pushed open the door, a place he never wanted to enter again unless absolutely necessary. He moved a cabinet and pulled out a thick dictionary from a small hole behind it. Flipping through the yellowed pages, memories of the past slowly emerged in his mind. Teabag was born from the incestuous relationship between his father and his mentally disabled sister. His father was a drunkard who hung out with bad company and would have Teabag perform spelling words for entertainment. Whenever his friends left, his father violated Teabag like an animal. Since then, Teabag had a deep hatred for his family's blood. Until he met Susan. It was only when he met Susan that he felt like he had a new lease on life. He asked Susan to rebuild his family with him, but how could Susan agree with a man who was wanted for the rape and murder of 6 students? Teabag finally told her the truth. The 6 students were actually direct relatives of the Teabag family. He wanted to cut off this dirty and evil bloodline, so he wouldn't want children. He intended to let the bloodline end with his generation. Teabag once again pleaded with Susan to accept him and live together, but from the fear in Susan's eyes, Teabag already knew the answer.
I can't. I'm sorry.
He locked up the mother and her 2 children, then sat silently in the yard by himself, staring at the axe on the tree stump as his tongue involuntarily began to move again. Not long after, the basement door was reopened, and the mother and her 2 children were completely terrified. However, what appeared in front of them were 2 policemen. The police said they rushed over after receiving an anonymous tip, but in such a remote place, it was impossible for anyone to know, and several kilometers away on the road, Teabag dropped the phone, sobbing uncontrollably. This was the first time in his life he felt such loss, because the hope that had always sustained him from then on was shattered. Perhaps he could never have an ordinary family for the rest of his life. Michael's reason for escaping from prison was to save his brother Lincoln, who was framed and sentenced to death. The charge was the accusation of murdering the President Caroline's brother, Terrence. After 2 months of relentless effort, the brothers finally managed to escape from prison and capture Terrence, who was faking his death. Once Terrence appeared in public, it was expected that Lincoln's wrongful case would collapse on its own. Caroline and the company behind her would also have no chance of turning things around. However, what they hadn't anticipated was that although the person in front of them was indeed Terrence, His teeth had already been pulled out by the company, and his fingerprints had been erased. Terrence had not only undergone plastic surgery but even the DNA in his file had been replaced and tampered with. So, even if Terrence showed his face, no one would recognize who he was. Just as the situation became deadlocked again, Terrence was mocking Paul, the intelligence agency operative who had just switched sides. "You're just a lowly lapdog. Don't think I don't know you're slaving away for my sister Caroline because you're hopelessly in love with her. You even proposed to her, but with your background, how could my sister ever look at you?" After saying this, Terrence covered his false teeth and laughed loudly, completely infuriating Lincoln. "We all suffered because of you. Some died, some went to prison, and you still have the nerve to laugh?"
You kill him? He's just a John Doe.
Just put your gun down.
When he puts his down,
Link, we're so close.
What's worth it? Killing those people. Ruining my life.
You'll get a handle on your brother.
You're not helping. You're not helping. Link, you don't want to do this. Trust me.
With Michael's persuasion, Lincoln finally managed to suppress his rage and put down the gun, but this standoff wasn't a solution. Ignoring Paul's objections, Michael picked up the phone and called the local most famous TV station.
This is Michael Schofield. I'm at the Cutback Motel, room 11. And I want to turn myself in.
Such explosive news was, of course, something the TV station wouldn't miss. However, Terrence became extremely agitated upon knowing that Michael intended to expose him. Suddenly, Terrence snatched the gun from Lincoln's waist, wanting them to let him go.
Terrence, we can't let you do that, Terrence.
Terrence, all we need is your mouth. I will shoot out both your knees right now.
I never liked you, Paul. I won't hesitate to take your life.
All right, Terrence, listen to me. Just listen. Terrence, for once in your life, do the right thing. All right?
But not wanting to ruin his sister's future and fearing imprisonment, after much hesitation, he chose suicide.
Sorry.
The three of them wanted to die. It's all over now. The police and the TV station had already arrived outside, but the body inside could not prove to be Terrence. Moreover, the brothers were still fugitives. This time, they were completely stuck in a dead end. Fortunately, Paul thought of a solution. He first showed his agent ID, then pretended to have arrived first to capture the two men. Once they came out, they took advantage of the situation to take a cameraman hostage and quickly drove away. After shaking off the police pursuit, the three of them arrived at an empty warehouse. After some discussion, they decided to create a sensational news story using the cameraman. Mahone had already recovered and returned to work, as the shot hadn't hit a vital part, and the news was currently broadcasting Michael and his brother's appeal video.
Penitentiary because I was sentenced to death for a crime I did not commit. I did not murder Terrence Stedman. He committed suicide last night in the Cutback Motel, 30 miles outside from his home in Blackfoot, Montana.
He killed himself out of fear. They've stolen billions of dollars and murdered dozens of innocent people, and yet they plaster our faces on the news and tell you to be afraid.
They are a group of multinationals, corporate interests. Together they're known as the Company.
They are working with the highest levels of government, including the President of the United States.
The next part was Michael expressing his apologies to Sarah, but the speech was interspersed with a code, hoping Sarah would see it and meet up with them. However, Mahone, being extremely intelligent, knew that not many people would believe the words of two fugitives. Moreover, there was no substantial evidence to pose a threat to the president and the company. So, the words Michael said to Sarah afterward were the most crucial. Immediately, Mahone printed out this speech and rushed to Fox River State Penitentiary to ask Sarah's former colleagues for clarification, and this was seen by Bellick, who had recently been imprisoned and brutally tormented. Speaking of Bellick, it's necessary to mention his regrettable past. Initially, Sarah's job here was actually thanks to Bellick's recommendation. Bellick, a middle-aged single man living with his mother, had always wanted to find a partner. He had intended to introduce Sarah to work here, and then slowly develop a relationship with her, but Sarah had no interest in him at all. For Bellick, he knew everything about what Sarah liked, what books she read. Upon seeing this speech, he realized that a few words were from a book Sarah liked very much. Mahone bought and reviewed the book, indeed finding a hidden message. At this time, Bill called to say that they had found traces of Haywire, a member of the escape team. but Mahone had no intention of focusing on such minor characters, so he went back to the prison to recruit Bellick to assist him. As long as Bellick agreed to be his dog, he could gain his freedom.
I need a junkyard dog who's willing to do the ugly things it takes to bring a con to justice. Are you my dog, Brad?
Damn hell yeah, I am.
The freed Bellick arrived at the scene and finally cornered Haywire on a high platform. He immediately called Mahone. Mahone's purpose was clear. Anyone who had contact with the brothers had to die, but not too obviously. So, after a thorough lecture from Mahone that this world was hell and jumping down would take one to heaven, Haywire was influenced by Mahone to finally jump from the platform. The next day, Michael and Sarah finally met at the train station, but with time pressing, there was no chance to talk about love. The urgent matter was to figure out the real purpose of the key. They looked at each other, clueless.
Sarah, we've got someone working with us now.
So, Michael introduced their new partner to Sarah. It was also at this time that Michael finally learned that Sarah had been severely abused by Paul. For the first time, Michael felt the urge to kill someone, but without Paul, their chances of taking down Caroline were almost impossible. Regaining his composure, Michael finally let go of his anger. Paul said the key belonged to a private club in Chicago. The four of them hurriedly set off. Paul, using his agent identity again, boarded the train and isolated a carriage for themselves. Midway, Paul secretly made a call to Caroline. Even then, Paul was hesitating whether to hand over Michael and his brother to Caroline or return to Caroline's side to obediently be her lapdog. But Caroline kept asking where they were, urging him to bring the people to her, never mentioning what would happen to them afterward. Although the agent's phone was equipped with anti-location tracking, Paul was unaware that Bill was arranging for someone to pinpoint his location through the sound of his voice. Before long, the train suddenly slowed down, and looking outside, they discovered that the train had been intercepted. This time, they might truly be trapped with no escape. A wanted criminal jumps onto the roof of a train that is rapidly decelerating, because the police had set up a roadblock ahead. And once the train stopped, the four fugitives inside would be sitting ducks. Lincoln climbs down from the escalator, successfully reaches the driver's cabin, and orders the train driver to crash through the blockade. At the same time, Lincoln opens the cabin door to let his accomplices in, threatened with their lives. The train driver has no choice but to restart the acceleration lever. Thus, they successfully break through the first critical barrier set up by the police. However, Michael knows that when the train stops at the next station, there will be even more police waiting for them, making escape impossible. After a moment of hesitation, Michael finally comes up with a cunning escape plan. After the four leave the driver's cabin, the train driver hears over the intercom that the fugitives have jumped off the train. He looks out the window and indeed sees several wanted criminals, so he immediately makes a distress call. Within minutes, a large number of police officers arrive at the scene and launch a helicopter to thoroughly search the area. Under the net, they were finally arrested by the police successfully, but then they realized that they were just railway staff dressed as the four fugitives. It was actually Michael who coerced the employees into sending the false alarm to the train driver, then swapped their clothes with those of the four employees, warning them to run into the forest if they didn't want to get shot. Meanwhile, because the police force at the next station was depleted, Michael and his three companions safely arrived in Chicago, swaggering through unchallenged. In order to clear their names and bring down the president, they steal a used car and head to a private cigar club to find out what secrets Sarah's assassinated governor father is hiding there. Sarah holds the key, searching for her father's cigar cabinet, while Michael keeps watch outside. But just as Michael is looking at the club's staff roster, a police car suddenly drives up to the window. Realizing that the police have already been monitoring the place, Michael quickly pulls Sarah to escape through the back door. As fugitives, they have no way to enter again, but on the club's introduction list, Michael sees an old acquaintance, Henry Pope, who was once the warden of Fox River State Penitentiary, was forced into early retirement and lost 30 years of pension because of Michael and the others' escape. and he just happens to be a member of this club. Sarah knocks on Henry's door. They reveal their purpose for coming. But how could Henry possibly aid two fugitives? The fact that Henry was dismissed and lost his pension at the brink of retirement was all because of Michael and others' escape. Just as Henry is about to call the police, Michael, out of desperation, pulls out a gun. Michael says this recording is crucial evidence of Lincoln's innocence and could even prove the president's crimes. If the contents of the cabinet don't prove everything they've claimed, he's willing to surrender himself. With everything said, Henry decides to trust Michael one more time. Henry finds a USB drive inside an envelope in Sarah's father's cigar cabinet. Indeed, skeptical at first, Henry borrows a computer and, after listening to the recording, hurries out of the club. But then, an unexpected visitor blocks Henry's way.
You don't mind if I ask you to empty your pockets?
As a matter of fact, I do.
I'm not going to play any games, Henry. We both know why you came here today.
I suggest you get out of my way, young man.
I can't do that.
Lincoln and Paul, who were keeping watch from the opposite building, quickly head down. Meanwhile, Michael drives over and hits Bill. Lincoln arrives and kicks Bill's gun away, not forgetting to throw several punches at Bill's face before leaving. Paul also takes out other enemies, but as he is about to get into the car, Sarah coldly locks the door, harboring a deep resentment for the torment Paul inflicted on her. Hearing the approaching sirens, Paul has no choice but to flee on foot. After obtaining the USB drive, Michael also gets out of the car with Henry, as he plans to fulfill his promise to surrender himself. However, Henry changes his mind after listening to the recording, which indeed contains crucial information as Michael said, and believes in Lincoln's innocence. As for the surrender, Henry suggests waiting until Michael has done what he needs to do. They part ways, and Henry finally finds a safe hotel. Upon listening to the recording, they are stunned by its contents.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The recording not only contains a conversation between Caroline and Terrence but also includes something unimaginable. The release of this recording could clear Lincoln's name and definitely bring Caroline down. However, being fugitives, any revelation they make could be dismissed as fake, so it must come from someone within the government. But where to find trustworthy government agents? Lincoln immediately thought of his father's secretary. Maybe she knows someone. After some inquiries, they finally contact the former acting attorney general, Cooper. However, their excitement dips again when Cooper listens to the recording. It turns out the recording is a copy, and the copied audio cannot determine the time of recording. This means the recording can't prove whether it was made before or after Terrence's fake death, and therefore, cannot clear Lincoln's innocence. But Cooper implies that although the recording is legally useless, Caroline doesn't know it's a copy. Michael quickly realizes he can use the recording to blackmail Caroline into granting a pardon, potentially saving him and his brother. If you come across someone with such a lewd expression in a restaurant, remember to steer clear because his motive for murder may be more than you can imagine, simply because the person looked somewhat similar to him. Teabag grabbed a metal object from the table and harshly struck the person's head. Teabag's sole purpose was to use the victim's ID to buy a plane ticket to Mexico, but when the staff was putting Teabag's luggage into the cargo hold, wads of robbed money fell to the ground. Luckily, no one else saw it.
Sir, I know that bag is way over the weight limit for carry-on.
Pounds make on a 3-ton aircraft, whether it's up above or underneath.
It's an FAA violation.
Wanting to avoid further complications, Teabag could only watch as the package containing $5 million was placed into the cargo hold. Unbeknownst to him, Bellick was also on the same flight. Bellick has now become Mahone's lapdog, earning $200,000 for each escaped prisoner he captures. This time, Bellick is headed to Mexico specifically to capture Sucre, who is hiding there. Fortunately, they are seated in different classes on the plane and do not notice each other, but when they were getting off the plane to pick up a package, Teabag finally spotted Bellick, who was also picking up a package. To avoid him, Teabag can only watch helplessly as his package is pushed into the warehouse. As Teabag sneaks into the warehouse to retrieve it himself, he is discovered by a staff member and mistaken for a thief. Fearing being recognized, Teabag quickly grabs a suitcase and hurls it at the staff member's head. The two engage in a fierce struggle. and Teabag knocks the staff member unconscious with a punch. The machinery detects an anomaly and emits a deafening alarm, leaving Teabag no choice but to abandon the package and flee in panic. Meanwhile, Sucre has successfully reunited with Maricruz in Mexico and is living a happy life in a house provided by his aunt. But while Sucre was watching TV, the news was showing a robbery at the airport by an unknown man. Sucre looked at the man and saw that it was Teabag, who had taken the $5 million. But how could he have robbed the bag?
Do you really believe that that money is at the airport? Hey, forget it.
Sucre has the idea to get the $5 million so that they can live the rest of their lives without worrying. However, Maricruz opposes the idea, not wanting to risk their current happiness for money. Sucre, content with having such a considerate girlfriend, turns to wash some cherries, only to find Maricruz missing.
Hey, looky here, good old Sucre.
What did you do then? Where are they? Maricruz!
Hey, keep your cap on! Unless you want to see me try out the new T-20Z on your bella muchacha Maripun. I think you better come with me.
It turns out Bellic has taken Sucre's girlfriend and aunt hostage, forcing Sucre to surrender for their safety. But upon learning Bellic is after the $200,000 bounty, Sucre offers a more tempting deal.
Wait. What if I know where you can get $5 million?
Where is it?
I could take you there. If you didn't have to take me back to the States and turn me back in.
Where is it?
Teabag's in town.
Teabag has meanwhile hired people to retrieve the package. As he looked towards the entrance, he just happened to see Sucre and Bellic coming for the package. Teabag broke into a sprint, then hailed a taxi and hurriedly made his escape.
Teabag, please! I need that money! I'm begging you, please!
Luckily, Sucre finds a tag on the package with the tourist's identity information. They immediately head to the tourism bureau, where, using Bellic's fake FBI identity, they ask the staff to call them once the person is spotted. With the money, Teabag resumes a comfortable life, hiring a woman to wear a wig and impersonate his beloved Susan, reliving their sweet moments together. However, when time is up and the woman demands more money to continue, Teabag, not lacking funds but annoyed by the mood being spoiled, argues with her. Unexpectedly, the woman insults Teabag's beloved Susan.
I don't know who this Susie is, but no wonder she wants nothing to do with you.
You didn't just call her a bitch, did you?
Okay.
Leading Teabag to kill again and flee to Panama, Sucre and his companion receive a call from the tourism bureau, unaware that Michael and his brother's destination in their escape is also Panama. Thus, several key escapees coincidentally gather in the same place, unaware they are stepping into a much larger conspiracy. Believing in the importance of abiding by the law, one can deeply understand the despair and helplessness that come with being a fugitive through the ordeal of this escapee.
You know Daddy loves you with all his heart, right? I love you so much. I'm so sorry.
Benjamin was not inherently a bad person. He had once served as a soldier on the battlefields of Afghanistan. He was sent to prison after being framed by his superiors as retaliation for whistleblowing on a higher-ranking officer. Driven by the longing for his wife and children, Benjamin joined a group of 8 escapees and successfully broke out of prison. He acquired an RV, planning to flee to some place across the border with his wife and kids. However, Dee Dee was suffering from a certain kidney disease that required daily medication, which they forgot to bring in their haste, leaving Casey no choice but to go to the pharmacy to buy the medicine. Unexpectedly, Casey's photo had been published in the newspaper, and upon recognizing Casey, the pharmacist hurriedly called the police, leading to Casey's immediate arrest. Hidden around the corner, Benjamin's heart bled, but he was powerless to do anything. Fortunately, before being taken away, Casey managed to throw the medicine into a trash can, barely sustaining Dee Dee for a few days. But after those few days, what then? Even if Benjamin risked arrest to go to the hospital, without any identification, it would be impossible for Dee Dee to receive treatment. With no other choice, Benjamin had to take Dee Dee to a private clinic. The environment here is dirty and messy, not to mention that the doctor took out the equipment is even rusty. Benjamin, how can he let this kind of things into Dee Dee's body? He left the money and ran away with Dee Dee. Looking at his increasingly weak daughter, Benjamin's emotions were mixed. With such a vast world, where could they find a place to belong? Holding his daughter tightly, his tears flowed uncontrollably.
You know Daddy loves you with all his heart, right? I love you so much. I'm so sorry.
Benjamin finally decided to turn himself in and made a call to Mahone. As a condition of his surrender, he demanded that Mahone ensure Casey and Dee Dee's freedom and safety.
I don't think I need to make a deal with you, Mr. Franklin.
Yo, what if I got something you need?
Mahone, too, had a troubled past. Several years ago, he accidentally killed a murderer during a violent arrest and buried the body in his backyard, leading to a painful divorce to protect his wife from discovering the truth. A mysterious company, upon uncovering Mahone's secret and using his family as leverage, coerced him into exploiting his position to hunt down the 8 escapees because among them, someone knew a devastating secret about the company. Mahone, who also has a wife and child, immediately arranged a hospital for Benjamin's daughter and released his wife. The supposed clue Benjamin offered was critical information on capturing Michael, one of the 8 escapees. It turns out that when Benjamin was digging for $5 million, he overheard Michael telling Sucre about a private mailbox on the internet, and told Sucre to contact him through the mailbox if he needed anything in the future. Impersonating Sucre, Benjamin sent several messages to the mailbox with no response. Bill believed Benjamin was deceiving them and ordered Mahone to eliminate him. Mahone had no choice but to explain the situation to Benjamin clearly. If you still want your wife and children to be safe, you will see a parcel when you return to the cell. You will know what to do after opening it. Upon opening the package and finding a rope inside, Benjamin immediately understood the implication. Despite his deep reluctance, Benjamin had no choice but to hang himself for the safety of his wife and child. Fortunately, a passing guard discovered him in time and saved him. After waking up, Benjamin urgently called Mahone to explain the situation. With Mahone not in the office, Benjamin could only ask Mahone's colleague to pass on a message. "I'll do what you asked. Just give me more time. And please, don't hurt my family." The words came out like a bolt from the blue, and even a fool could have guessed that Mahone was up to no good. Thus, internal affairs agents immediately intervened in the investigation. They approached Benjamin, promising him freedom and the erasure of his criminal record if he was willing to testify against Mahone's misconduct. It was a huge offer Benjamin couldn't refuse.
You put that in writing and you got yourself a witness.
Meanwhile, Mahone was descending into madness, still decoding the secrets of Michael's tattoos. After painstakingly arranging them, he finally realized that each tattoo followed a sequence, each corresponding to Michael's prior escape and subsequent steps. Mahone also discovered the final part of the plan, which was Michael's ultimate escape destination.
Be biblical, chapter 6, verse 17.
617, 617, June 17th. Oh, what's today?
15th.
So whatever his last step is.
It's gonna happen in 2 days.
However, the significance of the rose and saint depicted in the tattoos puzzled him. Gathering a large team, he began to decipher its meaning. Christ for the saint and rose combined to form Christina Rose, which was Michael's mother's name. Yet, Michael's file indicated that his mother had died early in Panama, raising questions about the connection to Michael's escape destination. While everyone pondered this mystery, Michael and Lincoln had already reached the shores of Panama. The Christina Rose turned out to be a large ship built in memory of Michael's mother, with 617 being the code to unlock it. Michael had constructed the ship before his incarceration, providing a means of escape to wherever they wished to go in the future. As internal affairs agents, armed with Benjamin's testimony, arrived at Mahone's office to collect evidence and bring him down. Mahone knew he could no longer stay in the United States. Thus, he fled overnight, planning to head to Panama. While looking at his child's photo and calling Pam, Mahone knew he had only one thing left to do before he could return to his family forever. Aware that going back meant capture and failing to deal with Michael and Lincoln would endanger his family due to the company's threats, Mahone resolved to steal Michael's escape plan and enjoy it solely with his family. Meanwhile, Michael, checking his mailbox during a moment of leisure, found a message from Sucre indicating that Teabag had also arrived in Panama. After much thought, Michael realized that it was precisely because he had escaped with Teabag that so many innocent people ended up losing their lives. Unable to overcome the guilt, he decided to capture Teabag and hand him over to the police before leaving. However, what he never expected was that the information actually came from Mahone, and Mahone's purpose in doing so was exactly to lure Michael out and capture him in one fell swoop.
See you soon.
It's the Prison Break Season 2 finale and the best reversal upon reversal in all 5 seasons of Prison Break. You'd never imagine the psyche of a serial killer could twist to such extents. Just because someone bore a slight resemblance to him, T-Bag didn't hesitate to grab an iron tool from the table and brutally smash it into the other person's head, leading to death. After the murder, T-Bag checked into a luxury hotel, hiring a prostitute to play the role of his girlfriend, Susan. However, when the hour of service ended and the lady asked for more payment to continue, T-Bag felt his mood spoiled by the request. A heated argument ensued in just a few words.
Craig, you ruined it. Thanks.
You know, I don't know who this Susie Q is.
You didn't just call her, did you?
Okay.
Following another murder, T-Bag coolly prepared to leave by the elevator, as if nothing had happened. What T-Bag didn't anticipate was the astonishing speed at which the cleaning lady would discover the corpse in the bathtub, putting the entire hotel on high alert. And just as he reached the door, T-Bag was recognized by the security guard. Obviously, with the stolen $5 million in his bag, T-Bag couldn't run fast. But strangely, a few hours later, T-Bag appeared in Panama, hundreds of kilometers away. He was accompanied by 2 armed bodyguards. T-Bag continued his search for pretty ladies, specifying that he wanted someone willing to wear a wig like Susan's and who could also speak fluent English.
Say, good morning, Teddy.
Good morning, Teddy.
So then, actually, no, you don't speak English. Habla en inglés around here. Say good morning, Teddy.
Good morning, Teddy.
Hey, good morning, Teddy Bear.
Good morning, Teddy Bear.
Like wigs?
For the right money, I like anything.
Thus, a stunning lady stood out. However, in the room, T-Bag was alone on the bed playing poker and there was no sign of the young lady. T-Bag occasionally pulled back the curtains to look outside, as if waiting for someone. Michael, hiding in the bushes outside, had tracked him down. As he looked at T-Bag on the second-floor balcony, memories of their past, including the many innocent lives lost because he had helped T-Bag escape, flooded his mind. He decided to personally catch T-Bag before leaving for good and send him back to prison, but the always cautious Michael noticed something off about a few people in the crowd. To confirm their identities, Michael thought of a plan.
¿Es bueno?
Es bueno. Gracias.
¿Necesita los otros?
Son tuyos.
Gracias.
De nada.
However, just as he was strategizing, he unexpectedly encountered Sucre and Bellic, who were also looking for T-Bag. It turns out Bellic wanted to steal the $5 million from T-Bag, and Sucre's girlfriend was being held captive by Bellic. Bellic promised to release Sucre's girlfriend if he helped him get the money, which is why they both ended up at the same place. Learning that Sucre hadn't contacted him through his letterbox, and considering the presence of the 2 bodyguards, it was looking more and more like an elaborate trap to Michael, but they couldn't worry about that now. The trio decided to join forces to catch T-Bag and achieve their respective goals. Following Michael's instructions, Bellic activated the fire alarm. Everyone in the hotel rushed out, including T-Bag with the $5 million, closely followed by his 2 bodyguards. Michael and his companions were right behind them. Unexpectedly, there was another person following them, former FBI agent Mahone, now a fugitive himself, aiming to capture Michael to monopolize his escape plan. But then Lincoln, Michael's brother, comes after him and knocks Mahone down with a punch and pushes him into the next room. The two engaged in a fierce fight, but with Lincoln's combat skills being top-notch, he quickly subdued Mahone. Meanwhile, T-Bag hid in an attic, with his 2 bodyguards blocking the way as Bellic pretended to ask for directions. Sucre took advantage of the distraction to overpower the 2 men, tying them to an iron post hidden in the shadows. The trio entered the attic to search for T-Bag.
3 to 1. Do the math. Okay. I don't want trouble.
Unexpectedly, the usually cunning T-Bag surrendered. throwing his gun on the floor.
Where's the money?
Who called the cops?
You got 3 seconds, hillbilly. 1.
In there!
Get it. Sucre, move your ass!
It turned out Teabag had already killed the English-speaking lady. As the trio was shocked, Teabag quickly slipped away through a back door. Hearing the approaching sirens, Sucre rushed to open the door, only to find that the doorknob had already been removed. Bellic pulled out a gun with his fingerprints, realizing they had fallen into a complete trap. With all their might, they finally broke through the door. A shot from Teabag hit Bellic's thigh.
Get the money! You want the girl? Get the money! Don't.
¡Vamos, la policía!
Ah! Inocente!
Sucre, come on.
Bellic was captured by the Panamanian police, while the other 3 escaped with the $5 million. As Sucre went to steal a car, Michael finally learned from Teabag that the FBI had caught him in the hotel lobby, and those 2 bodyguards were actually Bill's men. They had offered Teabag freedom in exchange for trapping Michael. Meanwhile, in a part of the ocean not covered by satellites, the company's highest-ranking boss, the general, finally spoke up. He gave Bill an important directive.
How much do you know about sonar, Mr. Kemp?
Only what I've been given clearance on.
Perhaps what our situation requires is a change in strategy.
This time, the directive was simple. They no longer aimed to assassinate Michael but to send him to Panama's Sona prison, because there are more important things waiting for him there. Michael and Sucre had finally nabbed the notoriously heinous Teabag, ready to hand him over to the police. But here's the kicker, both Michael and Sucre were on the wanted list too, as they were hashing out a plan to toss Teabag to the cops and make a clean getaway. Teabag sneakily hooked a screwdriver with his foot from the ground and plunged it into Sucre's body. Michael, in a desperate attempt to unbalance Teabag, jerked the steering wheel, but Murphy's Law, the car careened off the road, propelled by massive inertia, and barreled straight into the woods. Waking up, Michael frantically dragged Sucre out of the car. Meanwhile, Teabag, seizing the opportunity, grabbed the $5 million and staggered into the forest. Sucre urged Michael to leave him behind and chase after Teabag. Michael had no choice but to entrust Sucre to a passerby and dashed into the jungle, hot on Teabag's heels. Given Teabag was lugging around the hefty $5 million, he couldn't run fast, and it wasn't long before Michael cornered him in a wooden cabin in the woods.
What exactly is it that you want, pretty?
I'm turning you in.
Teabag offered to split the $5 million with Michael and go his separate ways, or else he would stab Michael with his blade. However, Michael, determined to bring Teabag to justice, shattered a beer bottle, ready to fight to the end.
Got my answer. Bring it, bitch.
With one hand already out of commission, Teabag stood no chance against Michael. With the knife at his neck, Teabag laughed heartily, convinced that the merciful Michael would never kill anyone.
Who you fooling? You ain't gonna kill me, Mr. Michelangelo. You ain't got it in you. So why don't we just let me...
Soon after, the Panama police received an anonymous tip. Upon opening the cabin, they found Teabag's other hand nailed to the floor. Michael, with the $5 million in tow, made his way to the dock. With money and a means of transportation, he and his brother Lincoln could go wherever they wanted. But upon boarding, Michael realized Lincoln wasn't there. Meanwhile, Lincoln called.
Sorry, Michael.
What's wrong?
Hello, Michael.
He had subdued Mahone but couldn't bring himself to kill. Mahone took advantage of this, kicked Lincoln's knee, and overpowered him. And now, Mahone has demanded Michael to come with the $5 million for a ransom and to leave that boat for him, because Mahone, now a fugitive himself, plans to take his family and exclusively enjoy Michael's escape plan. Michael, having once sacrificed his future to save his brother, wouldn't hesitate to give up the boat and money. But before heading to the exchange, Michael secured a backup plan.
You still in the magic business?
Siempre.
What's your name?
Chaco.
he ordered another boat from the local underworld and left a special gift for Mahone on the previous boat. But Mahone, cunning as ever, took the keys to Michael's boat first upon arriving at the exchange site. He then called Bill, revealing the location to catch them, and subsequently tipped off the local police about 2 American men who had allegedly shot an Asian man in a suit. With this, even a fool could guess Mahone's plan: to escape with Michael's boat and money, hand the brothers over to the police, and eliminate Bill, who had been blackmailing him. It was a slick move by Mahone, but he completely failed to notice that Lincoln was quietly loosening the bolts on the handcuffs binding his hands. Before long, Bill finally arrived, and Mahone pointed a gun at him, but Bill wasn't scared because he had a backup plan. Lincoln broke free, and a fierce gunfight ensued among the 3 parties. Michael and Lincoln took this opportunity to escape, taking the hidden $5 million with them as they hurriedly fled. Meanwhile, Mahone managed to kill Bill's 2 henchmen and escape. Although he didn't get the $5 million, he was satisfied with the escape boat, but he couldn't have anticipated that the Coast Guard had received an anonymous tip and found 2 large packages of cocaine on the boat. This was Michael's parting gift to Mahone. In Panama, possession of drugs is a serious crime. Mahone was confused. Even if he had 100 mouths to feed, he wouldn't be able to explain. At this point, the brothers Michael and Lincoln emerged as the biggest winners. Led by Chaco, they arrived at their newly purchased boat, where they were greeted by the person Michael had been longing to see, Sarah, but she was arrested by Mahone in the US. So how did she end up here? It turns out, Sarah was prosecuted immediately after her arrest for aiding Michael's escape, which led to 8 prisoners breaking out, and the court was ready to sentence her to 9 years in prison. Just when Sarah was in despair, a key witness suddenly appeared. Paul.
What? A very credible witness has just come forward, and he's willing to testify. He'll corroborate everything you've said about this conspiracy.
Who had been working for President Caroline but ended up with nothing, guilty about Sarah and having done so much for the company only to be betrayed. Paul decided to testify in court. He exposed everything about Lincoln's case and Caroline's deeds, causing a sensation. As a result, not only was Sarah exonerated, but Lincoln and Michael's wrongful convictions were also brought to light, meaning they no longer had to live on the run. However, Michael couldn't be reached by phone, prompting Sarah to travel all the way to Panama. Upon hearing this news, the hearts of the Lincoln brothers remained unsettled for a long time. Yet, before they could celebrate for 2 minutes, Bill showed up again. His mission wasn't to kill Michael but to send him to Sona prison. Thinking Bill was after the money, Lincoln hurriedly threw the $5 million at Bill, only for it to be kicked into the sea. In a desperate moment, Sarah emerged and shot Bill dead.
We gotta go.
Hearing the approaching sirens, they quickly fled in different directions. Lincoln ran and hid in the woods, but Michael and Sarah could not run fast enough, and finally they were blocked in the cabin, surrounded by police. Michael knew there was no escape this time. Michael tried to calm the panicked Sarah and asked her to hand him the gun, pretending they would surrender together. But at the door, Michael restrained Sarah.
Don't move! I'll shoot!
Michael, what are you doing?
Nobody moves! Nobody!
Tiene un rey!
You sacrificed everything for me once.
No! Don't move!
No, I'm not gonna let you do this. Michael!
Now it's time to say thank you.
It was me! It was me!
He's done nothing.
I did it!
He's done nothing.
I did it! I did it! It was me!
She shouted that she was the killer, but in Panama, the authorities couldn't understand her. Eventually, Michael was imprisoned again, this time in Sona prison, along with T-Bag and Mahone, and the severely beaten Bellick was there too. Michael soon realized that compared to Fox River State Penitentiary, Sona was truly a hell on earth, a place where you could die in many ways but never of old age, as no one ever leaves alive.